is in the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. It is the visit of Jesus with Martha and Mary. If you would like to follow along in your pew Bible, the words can be found on page 67 in the New Testament. The words will also be displayed on the screen. Now as they went on their way, he entered a certain village, where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. Then Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." The word of God for all people.
Thanks be to God.
Here's a question. Do you ever find it ever hard to listen to somebody? Yeah. Well, either you don't agree with the person and you immediately want to put your 2 cents in, right? Mm-hmm. It's okay if I ask a question, you can answer. They're not all rhetorical. Yeah, so either, we don't like what someone is saying, we want to put our own 2 cents in, or we just want to just keep yapping away. You know, it always amazes me that we were born with 2 ears and 1 mouth rather than 1 ear and 2 mouths. You might say we act like we do have 2 mouths sometimes and not listen enough. I can remember when I had my experience at the Academy for Spiritual Formation, which is sponsored by the Upper Room of the United Methodist Church, a 3-year program where you go away for 1 week a quarter. And my particular spot was in Burlingame, California, just south of San Francisco, at the Sisters of Mercy Convent. I can remember first going there and looking at my room. There was just a bed, a table with a Bible, and a hanger with a little coat thing. So it was very, very stark. I felt like I was a monk going to a monastery. But one of the things I want to share with you the day, because it's very important about this whole listening concept. The day would start with morning prayer. And after a time of morning prayer, we would have a very hearty breakfast. And after that hearty breakfast and some time to get cleaned up, it was now a time to attend the lecture. The lecture went on for about an hour, and then afterwards, we were told we had to be silent for the next hour. Now this was new for me. You can ask my wife. I like listening to lots of music to fill in the space, or something to keep myself occupied. This was new for me, to try to let all of that go and just be silent. For as we were dismissed to go from the lecture, the idea was in that silence and thinking about what we heard in the lecture, where would we find the voice of God in that? Where would we find the voice of God? And then after a notion of silence, an hour of silence, we would come back and share what we discovered in that silence. And there would be some talk back with the lecturer as well for some clarification or further understanding of what was being talked about, this particular part of Christian spirituality. Because what we explored during the 3 years were different parts of spirituality of our Christian faith tradition. So after this then, it was time for lunch. And lunch was a hearty meal as well. So much so that we were grateful that we got the opportunity 2 hours off in the afternoon so we could walk off all those calories. It was hard. We came back at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon for the afternoon lecture, and then after 1 hour, bingo, silence again. With the idea, listening for God's voice. We would come back, discuss, and all of that. Then the next thing in the afternoon would be worship. Every day was worship. Everything I was telling you happened every day. And it always included communion. So after that, then it was time for supper. And supper was hearty just as well. And then we gathered at about 7 o'clock with our covenant group. And we were all put together. We didn't have a chance to pick who we got to be with. It's like being part of family. You can always choose your friends, but you can't choose family, right? So we had about 2 hours in this fellowship time, this covenant group, to talk and to listen. And the only way that you were allowed to talk is if you held the talking stick. All right? And it was placed on the table, and however the Spirit moved us would be whether or not I was the first one, or Brenda was the first one, or Joan was the first one. These are people in my covenant group. There was about 8 of us. So we would pick up, and we would just kind of share partly what was going on in our life at the time, as well as what we were listening to in the lecture. And as that person held the talking stick, we all had to listen. There was no saying, oh yeah, I agree with you and all that. No, we had to wait until the talking stick was put down, and then it became an opportunity for us to reflect on what that person said. Now the idea was to reflect, not to try to fix what's going on in a person's life. That's very important. That's what a good listener does, not try to fix another person's problem. You're there in presence to show support through your presence and your listening ear. So after that time, and first when I thought 2 hours with these people, after graduation, after 3 years, every year my covenant group, have been meeting once a year, depending on where we live in the state. And that's been going on, gosh, for 10 years now. In fact, our next meeting is in Colorado, in the Denver area, next month. But so after that, then we would have evening prayer, and when we were dismissed from evening prayer, we were told now you are to remain silent until morning prayer. So of course that was interesting too, when you go to the washroom to brush your teeth, and of course you want to say goodnight to people, but you don't. Or in the early morning when I would get up to take my walk, and I would pass people on the street outside and on the paths, and we would just smirk because we knew we weren't supposed to talk, and I held fair to that. But the whole point of that was to help us to listen to the voice of God, and to listen to each other. What is on our hearts? What is on our hearts? In today's scripture lesson, as you heard, Jesus comes to the home of Mary and Martha. Now, Luke's the only other person in what we call the Synoptic Gospels, that is Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In the Gospel of John, of course, we know Mary, Martha, and their brother Lazarus, who Jesus raised from the dead. Most scholars agree that probably it's the same Mary and Martha. But Luke has Jesus. Jesus comes to make this wonderful visit in his home. And we have Martha. She is really, as the scriptures lead us to believe, very busy. Very busy. And Mary, however, just kind of sits down at the feet of Jesus to listen. To listen. Now, don't want to give a bad rap for Mary. There's a scholar. I want to remember her name here. Bonnie Thurston. She wrote a book, Women in the New Testament, Questions in Community. And she puts forth the idea of the underlying Greek word of this word of service, which relates to the same word that where we get our word ministry from. And I imagine the common notion we all have is that Martha is busy in the kitchen, maybe baking cookies or getting things ready to serve Jesus. But that underlying word says, no, probably not. That Martha is busy about the administrative works of ministry for her and her sister and for the community that they're in. This is significant in that, see, Luke was written probably about 50 years after this particular story of Jesus and Mary and Martha, which means that those two women's names were carried 50 years into the life of the church, even till today, which says to me and others that these two women had a very important place on the side of Jesus in the ministry of the church. So perhaps what Martha is busy about, again, taking care of the administrative tasks of, okay, who do we have to serve this week? Who are the orphans and the widows that we need to visit? Who are the poor that we need to visit? And she's trying to get all this arranged, and then she could have time with Jesus. But Mary, who's supposed to help her with this, she's already at the feet of Jesus, listening. They're sisters, right? And more than likely, Martha is the firstborn, because that's the way firstborn are. They kind of take control over things to make sure it's right, because firstborn, they want to make sure their parents are very impressed with their ability to get things done. How many firstborns are here? You know what I'm talking about. It's a book by Kevin Lehman about firstborn. You should read it sometime. But there's a story that I want to share with you about some sisters. Jill Harness writes this article about famous sisters who changed history. And there were the Grimke sisters. They were the first women to publicly act in American social reform movements. And this is significant for these two, because while many revolutionaries are raised by very progressive parents, these two children, their parents were far from progressive. Their father was a Supreme Court justice in the state of South Carolina. He was also very much against education for women and subordination for women, and he owned slaves. He owned slaves. In fact, these two sisters grew up on a plantation. Now, the sisters' names were Angela and Sarah. And Sarah, she was so upset about having to live in this kind of environment. At 5 years of age, she ran away from home to try to find a place where she could live where there was no slavery. As she got older, she would learn. She would study and study and study. And when she told her parents that she wanted to go to college, they immediately told her to stop studying. So then she decided, well, please let me be like a godmother to my sister, because at least then the two of them could share ideas. And ideas they did, because those two became activists in their time. They went up to Massachusetts in 1838 to speak to people, especially to women, young women, about how they could make a difference by becoming abolitionists. Right? You know the story of slavery and how the abolitionists were working very hard to free the slaves. These kinds of things happen throughout history. There's always an oppressed people, and then there's always a group of people that want to lift them out of oppression. And you can see it even today in our society. So they continued going on, and people from all around would listen to these two sisters speak. And so much so that they were very happy that they were alive enough to see that the slaves were indeed free and witness the passing of the 15th Amendment to our Constitution. So sisters can work together well. And I'm sure that Mary and Martha worked well as well. Again, Martha is probably overwhelmed with the task of ministry. And her sister, Mary, what are you doing? Well, we don't want to berate Martha ever, because I believe there needs to be a balance here. And it's no accident, I believe, that Luke has placed the story right after last week's the parable of the Samaritan. Remember, the Samaritan goes out and does ministry to the man lying in the ditch. And the one thing I forgot about mentioning about that kind of service is that what that man in the dish brought the best out in the Samaritan. Just like when we serve people in whatever capacity we do, that brings out the best in us. That brings out the best in us. So I can imagine that not only is Mary listening to Jesus, but Jesus is listening to Martha as Martha makes her complaint. And of course, Jesus says, well, come on. She's chosen the better thing. Because by listening to me, she will now know what needs to happen next in the aspects of ministry in your community, which is probably the area of Bethany, outside of Jerusalem. So listening is indeed important. And when we can turn our attention to listening not just to God, but listening to one another, listening to strangers. Remember last week I told you the Subway story, right? Where I would tell the person who made the sandwich, no more to be done, you've made the perfect sandwich. And how it changed their demeanor. I went back again, because I like Subway sandwiches. Turkey and cheese. But this time was interesting because it was the same person who made the sandwich, and I said the same thing in a bright, cheery voice. Thank you for making the perfect sandwich. And then I heard her say, like very softly, I wish other people would say the same thing. This person works hard all day, serving people. And some of them don't even say thank you. So it's important to listen, again, not only to God, but to the people around us. Because by then we can figure out, well, how can I give help to that person? What can I do to share the gospel? What can I do to help them listen to me when we can get to that point and talk about Jesus? So try it this week. Listen. Find a quiet place. If you can't do it for an hour, do it for 5 minutes. You can baby steps, right? Start with 5 minutes on one day, 10 minutes the next, until you can build it up to a time. And you can go beyond an hour too. It's not the limit. But the idea is to take the time to listen. Because when we listen, then we can begin to figure out, what am I going to do? What is my purpose in this world? Amen.